Senela. I'm fine. Great to talk to you.
Yes, I'm so excited to see you, and I love talking to you. I enjoyed speaking to you before as well, and I thought I must invite this lady to have an exclusive conversation with me for the program she's going to do for us. Oh,
All right.
wow.
Yeah. Well, I do hope I can bring my small contribution, in what you are doing. And I want to thank you, of course, to give me this opportunity to bring my contribution to the world, and particularly to women in the world. So I'm very excited too, and I do hope that it will help many, many women in the coming future. And we don't know where these things go usually. We never know.
So let's set the pace here. So people listening in right now, watching this, they'd be like, what are these two ladies talking about? So, all right, guys, so what we're talking about is, let me introduce you to the very beautiful and amazing Isabelle Galle. So she's spectacular. She's got so much of passion, and it's so inspiring just to hear her, and I thought I must feature her, and I personally invited her to be our spotlight speaker for the upcoming leadership forum for women on cash flow management. And so here we are presenting Isabelle, and we're just going to have a chat just for you guys to really experience what the session is all about, and who the lovely Isabelle, what's she all about. And so with that, Isabelle, I remember the first time we had a conversation about, just doing something to do with leadership development for women. Something that really attracted me to you was that I noticed that you are a strong woman. You are a woman who has a business with chapters worldwide. And also, what I love about you is that you're already so involved in the space of educating people around the world. And can you just tell us a little bit about you? Because people who don't know you, I know you, but then people are like, who is this lady? So if you can just open the floor and tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. Well, since I was a child, I've always thought that variety is the spice of life. So we can say that my life has been very spicy, and I wore many hats in my life, but it always went back to two things. Smelling and nature, things about smells, but also business and marketing. So I grew up abroad. My father was an expat, okay, so we traveled quite a lot from a very early age, which allowed us to gain a lot of knowledge about various cultures, okay? They always say that when you travel, your mind becomes more expanded, and it's true. Eventually, this comes back to you, and when you have a bit of experience, then you want to share. So education was always like something I had in the back of my mind. I always thought when I was young, later on, when I have a lot of experience, I will share, because there is no point learning without sharing, in my view. Now, as a woman, of course, when you have a business mind, you face a lot of challenges, more, I think, than men. And the reason is because, I don't know, we are strong, but, it's very difficult for us to get credibility in this world, which is mostly run by men. So I did have a lot of challenges, but I enjoyed every bit of my life. So let me tell you a bit about my career. So I arrived in Africa, in West Africa, at the age of 15, after having spent 10 years before with my parents in New Caledonia, which is in the Pacific, next to Australia. So we arrived in Africa. I was 15, and I loved it immediately. I, of course, followed French school courses, and then I had to go to university in France. But Africa was always in the back of my mind. So as soon as I graduated, I returned to Africa. I thought, no, I'm not staying in France. There is too much to do in Africa. So I returned to Africa, where I got employed by a multinational Japanese company, which was very unusual because it was actually the only Japanese company in West Africa. The reason why they employed me is because I knew the cultures. I could talk to the people in West Africa, but also I could speak English, even though it's with a French accent, but I could speak English. So everything was done in English, and so they were very happy to recruit me. Then they appointed me as assistant marketing manager. So what we did is that we had to identify suppliers and potential distributors for their products throughout various territories of Africa. So we covered over 20 West African countries and Central Africa as well. And I was traveling a lot, really traveling a lot all the time with them, but not in big cities, because the potential distributors for their products, which were mainly spice related, were in the bush, basically, in the middle of nowhere. By visiting all these places, I learned so much. I mean, I learned a lot about the cultures, the various cultures, because, Africa is a continent, but each country has a different attitude, a different culture. And a lot of people in our Western world forget about that. They say Africa and they think it's a country. No, Africa is a melting pot of many countries with many cultures. So every time you go to a different country, you encounter different challenges, but also a different culture. And you need to adapt, okay? So traveling to all these places, did help me to gain a huge knowledge about the various African territories and the various mentalities and the various languages, because of course you have a lot of countries which speak English, but a lot of them speak French, and then you have the Portuguese. All this past of Africa is still very much present somehow, whether it's in terms of language or culture. So I did that for a few years, and then I thought, great, but at some point I need some experience about Europe. So I flew out of Africa to go to the UK, where basically my first objective was to try to convince people to invest in Africa. But that was in 1988, and to be honest, it was much too early. I was like 20 years too early to try to convince people to invest in Africa, because at the time, nobody was really interested. So I had to completely change my career, and I ended up in translation, which was nothing to do and not as exciting as working in Africa, but still giving me a lot of knowledge about the English language. And because I was translating many different things, I still was involved a lot with things like United Nations, USAID, or translating all these documents from international institutions. So it kept me, in the loop somehow. After that, I went to work in luxury tourism in Spain and the Canary Islands. And eventually, all this, I returned to Africa. So, that was like a 10-year period, and Africa was always a place where my mind was. So I decided to return to Togo, where I had spent my youth and where I had worked for the Japanese company. But what happened is that, I had left Togo in 1988, and it was called at the time the Switzerland of Africa, because it was really the most advanced part of West Africa. You had a lot of things going on, a lot of investments, But in between, during those 10 years, what happened is that, Europe and the Western world tried to push African territories and countries towards democracy. And that didn't really work well in Togo. So eventually they ended up having an embargo, international embargo, which meant that they were getting no help, no assistance at all. So when I returned to that country where I had so many experiences and where I knew so many friends, and I returned there, it was like returning but to Haiti, you know. It was not the Switzerland of Africa anymore. It was more like Haiti, very, very poor, struggling, you know. So I thought, well, I've got to do something to help this country. So I helped the country as much as I could using my international relations. And that's when I realized that women were the pillars of development and of sustainability and of education. So everything I did from there.
Yes.
Sorry,
Isabelle. Can you tell me more about that? You said that was a point you realized that the African women, they were really the cause of development, education. They were driving that in their local communities. Can you tell us more about that? What was your observation? And I mean, can you tell us more?
Yes. Seeing that most of the time I was going in rural areas, okay, so you have to forget cities, because in cities, well, you know, there are cities that are more developed, but they still work hard. Now, most of the actions I was doing in Africa were in rural areas, and there what you see is that you see women getting up very early, but like, you know, before the sun rises, putting their kids on the back, putting their basket on the head with everything they can sell, but mainly walking like 20 kilometers to go to the closest market or market stalls to try to sell whatever they can during that day, you know, in order to feed their children. You know, what I found is that they were very determined, very hardworking, okay? Now, I'm not saying that men don't work, but it's totally different. They are more like laid back, okay? They let the women do. And you have also to take in consideration that in Africa, they are still very much in polygamy. You know, a man has several wives, okay? So very often what happens is that wife number one eventually becomes wife number 2 or 3 because the guy is remarrying a new wife. So when he marries a new wife, well, the ex one is like left on her own. So she has got to feed and focus on her family. You know, she can't rely on the man because the man has now got a new wife and probably is going to have new children, you know, and that's how it works. So you have to take into account this part of the culture, which is still very, I don't know, matriarchal somehow, where the mother, well, is important, but you know, the polygamy and this culture is obviously putting a lot of challenges for most women. So they've got to work all day, and their first thought in the morning is, okay, what am I going to do today to feed my family? Okay, so when you have this kind of thought every day, you can't think about other things. Okay, you know, education is basic. I mean, most of them are not educated. I mean, the illiteracy rate in Africa is still quite high. Okay, now in many countries they oblige children to go to school until at least the age of 16, but it's not in all. And even though it's a very nice thought and a very nice policy, it doesn't really work because, you know, let's say the school is 30 kilometers away. How do they go to school, you see? So they have so many challenges. So you need to take into consideration the fact that in rural areas is still very, very remote, and infrastructure for many things is not there. So women are the pillar to ensure that they feed the family, but also ensure that the kids get education. So they will, you know, go out of their way to actually try to make sure that kids get a better life, you know, because that's their purpose, okay?
So Isabelle, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So you've been in Africa, you've worked in Africa, you had your youth in Africa, you have a lot of experience in Africa. And the Leadership Forum coming up is going to do a lot of focusing around really addressing economies where women are not, you know, predominantly there. They're not predominantly present. We're talking about economies where, you know, it's still developing and they're still behind, but there's enormous potential. And like you said, there is a massive cultural dynamic into all of this. So what I wanted to ask you is, you know, based on your experience, when you think about women in Africa, particularly the women in Africa, and, you know, what are some of the key challenges that you see, that you have observed in Africa for the women there who want to set up their own business? What I really want to get at is, what kind of the mindset challenges would they have? Because culturally they're still sort of, you know, pushed back. So what is your observation?
Yeah. Well, you know, you need to know they are quite business oriented, the women in Africa. Okay, they have a good sense of business. I mean, if you take the country where I live, Togo, but the next door country as well, Ghana, they used to have the Nana bands. Now the Nana bands were the entrepreneur women, okay, running retail stores and shops in both these countries. And the reason why they were called the Nana bands, and they're still, I mean, you still have Nana bands. They are called Nana bands because they became so rich, okay, that they were driving around in Mercedes Benz, okay. So
wow, really?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
In Ghana?
So in Ghana and Togo, in both, and Benin to some extent, all this part of the world, and Nigeria. Okay, so it extended all the way from basically Ghana to Nigeria. So the Nana bands were the retailers, okay, selling everything from tomato to clothes to you name it, okay. Now, they are very well considered in their country because they have a lot of economic power, because, well, they help the community in general, you know, because of what they do. So the thing is that the way business is made in Africa is very informal, still very informal. You do have a growth into more formalized businesses nowadays, but it's still, most of it is still very informal. So you're talking about a black economy, okay, where they are not really paying taxes, you know, it's all cash in hand and so on. The challenges they have most of the time is to start up, obviously. They all want to, their first port of call or thought usually is a market stall. A market stall, because then they can sell vegetable and fruit and sweets, you know, the main and more common things that people want there. To set up a market stall, they of course need to rent the market stall because they have to pay at the market, and they need to get the stock, the initial stock. So they need the funding, okay? Usually, because Africa works in big family, you know, it's basically you have a big family and they have a pot, a piggy bank, where everybody who works puts something in the piggy bank, okay? So when one of them wants to set up a business, they talk to the rest of the family and say, can I borrow from the piggy bank, you know, and I will refund, you know, in 1 year time or when I've started. So it does work very informally, but of course, the problem you always have is that they have a lack of education on basic skills, you know, and they are very much under the power of the husband, who doesn't know the difference between a turnover and a profit. Okay, so the husband will see the money coming in and want to spend it. Okay, so, you know, they are really between a rock and a hard place, because
Yeah.
On the one hand, they have a knowledge of the fact that, they can't span it all. On the other hand, well, it is helped to feed the family on a day-to-day basis. So whatever they make today, the part that is made, the profit, is going to actually be reinvested in buying the food and the clothes and paying the school for the kids. Okay, so they are always faced with the challenge of not being able to grow that quickly. Okay, because it's a day-to-day basis thought process. So I would say that what is changing now is that maybe women see more about the future. Okay, when they set up something, a startup, a small business, maybe they do it now more with a vision of growing for the future, and maybe passing it to their kids. Okay, as an established business. So the challenges are funding, obviously, the cultural issues that they have to face. Okay, the dynamic, as you call it, the fact that the politics and the government are not really helping women because they are still very misogynistic in Africa. Okay, women is like second rate.
But did you say that? Did you say that Ghana and Togo and other country, like, they are better with that, making it more economically viable for women? Is
that the reason why that is because they have become, it's an elite of women, of course. It's not all the women. In Togo, you are talking about maybe 15, 20 women, who are called the nanabens. And then, of course, the politicians will listen to them because they represent a big chunk of the economy. Okay, so I give you an example. When I was in Togo years ago, what happened is that the men used to take the money from the women, the working women, and they used to go and play it in slot machines. Now you have to realize that at that time you had slot machines everywhere on the market and everywhere in the streets. Okay, so men were taking the money and putting it in slot machines, and of course losing it most of the time. So that was making things worse for the families. Women, the nanabans, went to the president of Togo then and said, look, you have got to stop allowing slot machines everywhere in the market. Their word and their gathering, and their pressure did work well, because what happened is that from there on, the president decided to adopt a law that you could only gamble in casinos. So if you wanted a casino, you needed a license. So they got rid of all the slot machines throughout Togo, and then it was only casino where most of the locals were not allowed to get in.
Wow, okay? That's a really good example.
Yeah. So that shows you how much power they had. Okay, they managed to actually change something because they said we can't carry on having our husband spending the money, that is used for our children and for the education and for our business in slot machines. So that was it, So that sorted it out. It shows you that they do have a lot of power. But we are talking about an elite of women. Most of them now have inherited from their mother. Okay, so it is a very settled business. But if we talk about younger women who are trying to get into this market, right? Yeah. Well, they still face the same challenges. Okay, funding. Cultural, the fact that they are seen to be here mainly to produce children, that's how they are seen. So it's very difficult also for the husbands over there to have the wives earning more than them. They don't like that. Okay, so you do need to talk to the men at the same time as the women in Africa. You can't talk only to women. When you try to help or educate, it has to be to both, okay? And it works, because I did it in northern Togo. And the men were actually very grateful to hear about it because they didn't know. Again, talking about the basics, they didn't know. They don't realize.
Yeah.
Okay?
Isabelle, something I've always been sort of thinking about is because, as the program that we're involved with Africa is the African Women Leadership Forum. And in that forum, what I've observed is a lot of the times we have our surveys that run behind the scenes, trying to just mingle with the women in Africa from various different countries, easily 7 to 8 different countries in the African Union. And approximately 70% of the time, what women tend to focus on when it comes to entrepreneurship is this word of funding. It's always just funding. It's always a capital. And sort of a glass ceiling that I'm facing is that, trying to educate them that, yes, funding is just fuel in your car, but learning leadership, learning the art of business, developing yourself as an entrepreneur is really building the vehicle itself. Or else you have the fuel, but then you don't have the vehicle, the car, to put the fuel in. So this is the sort of paradox that I'm seeing in women in Africa. So what are your thoughts on that, and what is the kind of education we can tell women right now? Say, hey, you want to get into a business? Stop concentrating so much only on funding. Like, what are your thoughts? Take it away, Isabelle. What do you think?
Well, I think that, of course, funding is important, and we are not talking about huge funds. I mean, you need to start with something. You can start small, really. Funding is not necessarily cash. It can be you talk to a company which is happy to give you a stock, temporary stock that you are going to start reselling. Okay, that's funding. I mean, you can generate funding from this, but you still need negotiating skills. You still need, if you are turning towards companies to tell them, look, I would like to sell clothes, right? Fine, but they want to believe in you. They want to believe that you are going to, sell more clothes for them, okay, because of your skills, okay? So you need negotiating skills. Not everybody can do business. You can think about it, but it's hard work. You need to know that it's hard work. You need to have some basic skills. You need to understand how cash flow works, how profit and turnover work. I mean, it's basic skills that I think even in Western Europe or in our Western countries, despite the fact that we all go to school and are educated, you don't gain that easily. I mean, personally, I was really bad at mathematics when I was a kid. I mean, really, really bad.
Who is it?
I wasn't bad at figures. I wasn't bad at figures, but this modern math and all the things they teach you, I couldn't get it. I couldn't understand. But it's only when I really got into business that I did realize how important it is to make the difference, to know what a percentage is, to know what turnover is, profit, all these basics. So you need to equip yourself with some negotiating skills, okay, and that is easily gained. But being an entrepreneur is a mentality. It's not for everybody. If it was that easy, everybody would be an entrepreneur, and it's not, okay? So it's a mentality. It means that you also are not the type of person who wants to get up, go to work and come back at 5 and stop it there. You work after work all the time. And you need the basic, what we call the functional skills, okay, to know that 1 + 1 = 2 and not 3, okay? So I would say that these are more important than funding, because once you have that, you can negotiate to get your funding. And you can start with 0, but you will get your funding somehow, okay, whether it's in cash or in other ways or manners, okay? So I think the problem is, you have to think out of the box. You can't say, oh, I'm going to set up a business, but I need $10,000. Well, if you wait for that, you will never set up your business because unless you were born with a silver spoon, or in a very rich family, where are you going to get $10,000? Right? So if you focus on funding only, you will never, your business will never take off. So sometimes what happens is that you have got to carry on working like a boring job, during the day to actually help you start your business in parallel. Okay? And once your business starts allowing you to make a living, then you can stop your boring job. But in my particular case, I kept on my boring job for about 5 years before I could say, yeah, I can now live from my business. Okay? So you have basically to duplicate or to work double for the first 5 years, and that's it. There is no secret, it's working hard but working smart. As I always say, work hard but smart.
I love that. You know what, Isabelle, something I sort of observed about you is that you're very practical in what you do and how you approach things. Like even what you just said, it's working smart. Can you, for our audience, basically share an example of when you were this young girl, you moved from West Africa to London, and you're there, you have this new country, you have to learn English, and like, what was your real raw human experience to set up the company that you are in now, which is so big? Like, what is that process? Because a lot of women need to hear what it really
first of all, one thing you learn, but it's not easy to know it when you are young, is time is your friend, not your enemy. Okay, so if you are young and you are trying to think about setting up a business, you have two options. Either you have got the next big thing and it's going to take off immediately, or you are going to have to develop it over time. Okay, so it wasn't a straight line. Setting up my own business wasn't a straight line. Okay, it was something that I had a vision of anyway. It was always there. So that is, I would say, skill number one. Have a clear vision of what you want to do, because it's all nice and all nice to say, oh, I want to start a business. Yeah, but what are you going to bring? Why is your business going to work better than others? Why are you going to be better than competitors? So you have to have a vision. And my vision started very young, but it's only, like 15 years ago that I actually, put it together to start a business which has been growing and growing and growing. Okay. So it's something that spanned over 2 decades. Okay. So I don't want to put anybody off, but, if you start, don't expect that it's going to be a success overnight. Unless, as I say, you have the next big thing, or you are in this, IT things, next big startup in technology. Okay, there you can get the big funding. Fine. Okay, it's great. I mean, but even those people who get big funding from these tech companies, they call it financial tech, don't think that because they have the next big, algorithm or whatever, it's working immediately. Usually they need to refund and fund several times. They have several rounds of funding before it starts making a profit. You take Facebook, they haven't made a profit immediately. Okay, so it took years. So I would say that time is your friend. That's the first thing. Okay, when I got to the UK, well, of course, I had to also adapt to the culture. It was like a cultural shock. I mean, having traveled all over the world with my parents and arriving in the UK at the time was a cultural shock. So I had to adjust, okay, to the language for a start. Or even though I had studied languages, well, English, at high level, my English was very, I used to say, old-fashioned. So I got there and they were talking like pidgin English or everyday English. And I thought, what are they talking about? So it took me 1 year to really understand everything. So it was hard, but at the same time, because of my experience in Africa, I wasn't put off. That's it. You need to be adaptable. That's the second thing. In business, you need to be adaptable. So if you are someone very stiff, very stiff who cannot think out of the box or adapt, you will find it very hard. Okay. And then, as I say, you always have to go back to the vision that you have, what you want to do. Because even though your road might go, other ways at some point, it's not like a straight line. Nothing is a straight line. Even though you are going off your, let's say, the road that you think you should be on, you always get back to it. Okay. So it's like a river, okay? The river has got meanders, okay? It's not straight, okay? So I think you have to be practical. You have to be very grounded, you have to know the difference to be realistic, between the dream and how you can achieve that dream and whether you can achieve that dream. Because you can have a big dream, and believe me, I had failures, okay? I was probably over ambitious, okay? But my ambition was too high compared with what I could do, what I could afford to do. So I faced a lot of disappointments on the road, okay? Once I started to realize that, no, it is a step-by-step thing, then things went very smoothly, So that's it. And also, what I found is that if you see that you are struggling, let's say you are starting your business, it doesn't work, you are struggling all the time. For me, it's a message. That means you are on the wrong path. You have to review something somewhere. A business needs to be reviewed all the time, reassessed, okay, to set new milestones. All these setting milestones is important, okay? Where do you want to be in 2 years' time? Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And what do you want your business to be like, at that time? And of course, you have to move with what's going on economically in the world, at the time. You need to reassess. It's a challenge all the time. But if you do it because it's something you like and you work with your passion, you can face all the challenges and the adversity, no problem, because it's much nicer to work for yourself rather than having to report to someone above you who is going to treat you like, a small, really, rather than having a boss, okay? You are your own boss. Being your own boss is the best.
Thank you, Isabelle. That's wonderful. I'm so happy that you gave some very practical steps and tips for our audience. And I think that's very important for women in Africa to remember that success takes time and success is by design. Because I think even one thing that I notice in maybe just in both genders, it's not just for women, but I think for both genders, we just want success instantly.
Yeah.
And I think what you said is really right there, to just be patient for the results and assess yourself, assess the plan. So thank you so much with that, Isabelle. And I look forward for your session coming up for the women of Africa. We're so excited. Thank you, Isabelle.
Thank you, Senela. Thank you for taking me on board. And I do hope that it will help many women. Okay?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, women. Bye, ladies. Bye-bye.